Chechens did the unthinkable. They brought a global power to its knees. Nobody expected victory, but it came at a high cost. Grozny was destroyed, and there was neither a Marshall Plan nor the necessary funds to rebuild the economy, despite sizable oil reserves. Economic despair, separatist tensions, brutalized combatants, and stockpiles of firearms would ignite Chechnya once again. The first democratic elections were held in 1997. The most notable two candidates were Aslan Maskhadov, a representative of traditional Chechnya who stood for peace with Russia and the long-established Sufism. Sufism is a spiritual, mythical interpretation of Islam. Maskhadov's opponent was the infamous Shamil Basayev. He would have turned Chechnya into an austere Wahhabism stronghold under Sharia law. War with Russia would also have been inevitable since he strived for a great Caucasus emirate. The apparent contradictions were of negligible effect throughout the war, but became non-negotiable during the election. The outcome would decide the fate of the Chechens, but which way would they go? 60% voted for Maskhadov, but his opponents and other warlords persistently undermined his government, however and whenever they could. Blood feuds, assassination attempts, other warlords, and the suspected involvement of the FSB turned the nation into a failed state. Without an economic recovery in sight, warlords resorted to drug trafficking and kidnapping as their main sources of income. Over the course of the Chechen independence, 1,300 people were abducted and ransomed for over $200 million across the North Caucasus. Most of these were international workers. While most abductions were only motivated by money and tolerated by Russia, the Islamic opposition also raided neighboring districts with the aim of inflicting as much damage as possible. The invasion was carried out by the 2,000 Islamists under Shamil Basayev's leadership. This was not a standard raid. It was an invasion with the specific aim of liberating the neighboring district. Instead of an uprising against Moscow, as planned by the invaders, thousands volunteered and formed local militias. The conflict lasted 6 weeks and ended in defeat for the Islamists. During the apartment bombings, 307 people were killed and more than 1,000 were injured. So many dozens of theories have circulated around that event that it deserves another video be made. Some say it was retaliation for the Russian counteroffensive in Dagestan, while others claim it was staged to bring the director of the FSB into the office of the Secretary of State. His name was Vladimir Putin. On the 16th of August 1999, he became acting Prime Minister under Yeltsin. 10 days later, the Second Chechen War began. The prelude to the war was an intensive bombing run across Chechnya by the Russian Air Force. On the 1st of October 1999, the ground invasion started. This time, they were considerably better prepared and equipped than during the First War. 80,000 men marched against approximately 25,000 Chechens. 5 days after the invasion, they crossed the Terik River that split Chechnya into two parts. A two-pronged attack into the south was carried out that encircled Grozny and occupied neighboring cities. Thousands of combatants and civilians were trapped. In late November, about 50,000 Russians and 2,000 pro-Russian Chechens were ready to storm Grozny. Unlike in the First War, Russia would make extensive use of rocket artillery, cluster bombs, and ballistic missiles, weapons designed to wear the enemy down both mentally and physically. The Chechens, on the other hand, transformed Grozny into a fortress with hundreds of trenches, anti-tank ditches, booby traps, and sniper nests. They made great use of their mobility and used the sewer networks to show up wherever they pleased. It took the Russians 2 weeks of shelling before they could gain a foothold in any part of the city. The fighting was fierce. Key buildings switched hands multiple times. Units were cut off, and snipers caused the Russian death toll to rise, but with supply routes closed off, division among the Chechens, and rising casualties, it was just a question of time until their inevitable defeat. During a winter storm on the last night of January 2000, the remaining 2,000 combatants broke out. On their way, they ran straight into a minefield, alerting the enemy artillery, which rained shells upon them. They were also ambushed while crossing a river. With nowhere else to go, they pushed through until they eventually reached Alkan Yurt, 23 kilometers outside of Grozny, and were reduced by 600 men. The rebel council decided to withdraw into the inhospitable mountains and carry on a guerrilla campaign. About 800 men were left to fight for themselves in the capital city, which would be occupied on 6th of February 2000. Over 1,000 men on the Russian side were either injured or dead. About 1,500 Chechen combatants suffered the same fate, making the siege of Grozny the bloodiest battle in the war. As the last pockets of resistance were captured in the mountains, large-scale fighting ceased, but this conflict was far from over. Still, hundreds of Chechens, Caucasian volunteers, and foreign-born Islamists were terrorizing innocent people all over the Federation. The most prominent cases would even make international headlines. On the 3rd of October 2002, a group of 50 men stormed the Dubrovka Theatre in the middle of Moscow. About 900 civilians were taken hostage. The assailants claimed allegiance to an Islamic separatist movement in Chechnya. They demanded the withdrawal of Russian forces and an end to the Second Chechen War. Negotiations were partially successful as the separatists agreed to release children, pregnant women, and some foreign nationals. However, multiple gunshot incidents were reported that led to several deaths. On the morning of the 26th, an unknown gas was pumped into the theatre and put most of the people to sleep. 30 minutes later, special forces stormed the building and engaged in a firefight with those who were equipped with gas masks or who had escaped the gas. At 7 a.m., rescuers dragged the unconscious bodies outside, but were unable to treat them since the government refused to release information about the chemicals that had been used. At least 130 died during the crisis, probably over 300 due to the long-term effects of the gas. The new school year starts on the 1st of September in Russia. On this day, children, accompanied by their parents and other relatives, celebrate the new chapter of the kids' lives. During the festivities in Beslan, North Ossetia, 31 men shot into the air and forced over 1,100 hostages into the school gym. They then mined the school with IEDs and tripwires to prevent any escape. The hostages were not allowed to drink or eat. Just like 2 years previously, the terrorists demanded formal Chechen independence. After 3 days and dozens of incidents, medical workers were allowed to remove 20 bodies from the school grounds. However, 3 minutes after the paramedics arrived, an explosion was heard. Then the terrorists opened fire. 22 seconds later, another explosion was heard, which set the gym's roof ablaze. Eventually, the roof collapsed and killed more than 160 people. The army and the terrorists exchanged shots while hostages tried to escape through the crossfire. After 12 chaotic hours, 334 hostages were dead and 783 wounded. While the Islamists terrorized the Federation, pro-Moscow Chechens rebuilt their homeland. Over time, the flow of new fighters decreased and high-ranking militants were killed, including Shamil Basayev, the mastermind behind the assaults. The Russians scaled down their presence in the region, leaving the burden to local authorities. In 2009, after nearly 10 years, it was announced that the counterinsurgency operation had ended. On the Russian side, 80,000 men had participated. Around 7,500 lost their lives. On the Chechen side, about 16,300 were killed. Between 25 and 80,000 civilians were victims of the war. Today, a low-level insurgency is still present in the Caucasus. Chechnya voted for a new constitution in 2003 that gave the state way more authority than other parts of the Federation, but it still tied them to Moscow. Is it enough to prevent another war for independence? I guess only time will tell.